You are now listening to Hinckley Community Radio, a non-profit podcast radio station.
On the evening of the 9th of June 1912 and the early morning of the 10th of June 1912, in the town of Villisca, Iowa, United States, 6 members of the Moore family and their 2 guests they had staying overnight were found bludgeoned to death inside the Moore residence. All 8 victims, which included 6 children, had severe head wounds made from an axe. A lengthy investigation yielded several suspects, one of whom was tried twice for the crime. The first trial ended in a hung jury, and the second ended in an acquittal. This crime still remains unsolved today. Greetings, Unexplained peeps. Thank you for tuning in and listening to Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes. I am a podcaster, an 80s DJ, and an eclectic wicker who wonders if it really would make such a difference to a skydiver if he wasn't wearing a safety helmet. Tonight I'm going to tell you the unexplained story about the Villisca axe murders. I will now give you the necessary disclaimer. This story is a tale that sadly involves graphic detail and children, so may prove upsetting to some. You listen at your own discretion. Also, all opinions and comments are strictly my own, but the facts still remain. I also apologise if I pronounce anything incorrectly. My English, although it is my first and only language, does need some elocution training at times. But hey, I'm an alien, remember? In fact, aren't we all? So, back to the story. According to Wikipedia, Villisca is a city in Montgomery County, Iowa, United States, with a population of 1,132 at the time of the 2020 census. And according to their own website, the city began as a small settlement called the Forks, positioned between the Middle and West Nottoway River. The first plan of the town was laid out in 1858 by D.N. Smith of the Chicago, Burlington and Quincy C.B.&Q Railroad. He named the town Villisca, which he said meant pretty place or pleasant view, in the language of the area's original Native American inhabitants. So, the Villisca axe murders. Sunday, 9th of June 1912, an unknown person or persons entered a small house in Villisca, Iowa, and bludgeoned to death 8 people living there whilst they slept. These killings became known as the Villisca axe murders, and it is easily the most notorious murder case in Iowa's history. The murder was a subject of an investigation, repeated grand jury hearings, a spectacular slander suit, murder trial, and numerous minor litigations and trials for well over a 10-year period. It also both established and destroyed a few political careers. In addition, the murder proved an unmitigating tragedy for Villisca. The Moore family was an affluent family and well liked within the community. They consisted of the parents, Josiah B., age 43, Sarah Nee Montgomery, 39, and their 4 children, Herman Montgomery, 11, Mary Catherine, 10, Arthur Boyd, 7, and Paul Vernon, 5. On the 9th of June, Mary Catherine Moore, the 10-year-old, invited 2 friends who had both asked their parents' permission to stay overnight. And they were Ina Mae Stillinger, 8, and Lena Gertrude Stillinger, aged 12. That evening, the girls visited... I'll try that again. That evening, the visiting girls and the Moore family attended the Presbyterian Church. Oh, I'll get this right, don't worry. where they participated in the Children's Day Service Sunday School end-of-year programme, one that Sarah Moore had coordinated. Her children performed their little speeches and recitations along with the other Sunday school members, and the service ended about 9:30 p.m. When the parishioners left and walked off into the night, no one ever thought that neither the Moores nor their overnight guest would ever be seen alive again. They decided to take the journey by foot. After all, it was only a 3-block trip, and like most Villiscians, in 1912, Josiah Moore didn't own a car. They eventually arrived back at the Moores' house between 9:45 and 10 p.m. Cookies and milk ended the festive evening, and they all went to bed. Then, sometime during the night, an unknown killer or killers picked up Joe's axe from the backyard, entered the house and bludgeoned to death all 8 of its occupants. At 7 a.m. the next morning, on Monday the 10th of June, a neighbour, Mary Peckham, became concerned. After she noticed the house was quiet and appeared deserted, and that the family had not come out to do their morning chores. So, like any concerned neighbour, she went over and knocked on the Moores' door. When nobody answered, she tried to open it and discovered that it was locked. Peckham, being helpful, let the Moores' chickens out for a run and called Ross Moore. He was Josiah's brother and the local druggist. Ross Moore arrived at the house at around 8 a.m. and, like Mary Peckham, when knocking on the door and calling out, he received no response. Ross unlocked the door with a copy of his own key, while Peckham stood on the porch. His cautious inspection of the downstairs revealed 2 figures covered with a sheet in the back bedroom. He found 2 sisters, Ina and Lena, Stinger's bodies on the bed. He also saw blood on the bedsheet. Ross beat a hasty retreat and called Joe's hardware store, telling his employee, Ed Shelley, to fetch Marshal Henry Hank Horton, as something terrible had happened. Hank was Villisca's primary peace officer, who had arrived at the house at around 8:30 a.m. Frank Horton's search of the house revealed that the entire Moore family and the 2 Stillinger girls had all been bludgeoned to death. He told Ross when he came out, "Somebody's been murdered in every bed." The partially cleaned murder weapon was left leaning against the south wall of the downstairs bedroom where the 2 visiting Stillinger girls were found. The killer had added 2 bizarre touches to the murder scene. The first was a slab of bacon weighing around 4 pounds, leaning against the wall next to the axe. The second was where the murderer had searched the dresser drawers for pieces of clothing to cover all the mirrors in the house and the glass in the entry door. Word started to get around the town about the murders. During the day, people were convinced that the killer must be a deranged tramp. They expected to find him drenched in blood and hiding somewhere in a barn. Repeated posse groups were formed to ride out of town in all directions on horseback and in cars to search for the killer. They returned empty-handed. Gangs checked streets and alleys and searched every barn, shed and privy in town. They too failed to find anyone. By evening, it had become evident that the killer had escaped. Everyone waited now for the arrival of bloodhounds being shipped in from Beatrice, Nebraska. The crowd waited anxiously, and because the atmosphere was very heavy with the threat of rain, they all feared it would wash away any scent for the dogs to follow. The 2 bloodhounds and their handler arrived at 9 p.m. train and were immediately brought to the 8 blocks from the depot to the murder house. Giving the bloodhounds the scent from the axe and the cloth he used to wipe it clean, even though perhaps 100 people or so had handled it since the killer. Seriously? Again I say, seriously? The dogs set off, followed by a huge crowd. This was estimated at more than 2,000 people, around twice the population of Villisca, and this mob pursued the dogs on foot, horseback, and again in cars. It seems crazy to believe that the dogs could follow a trail so contaminated and cold, but they ran through the town, ended up at the west fork of the Nodaway River. They made a second run down the same trail, not finishing until after midnight. They retraced their route for a third time in the morning and then returned unsuccessful once again to Nebraska. During all these hours of excitement, search and depression, the bodies were left to lay just as they had been found. This grotesque neglect was because the county coroner, Dr. Lindquist from Stanton, refused to release the bodies until authorised to do so by County Attorney Ratcliffe. Mr. Ratcliffe was away visiting in Cedar Rapids when he was notified of the murder. He was on the westbound train that arrived Monday evening within minutes of the bloodhound's arrival. By the time he had authorised the victim's release, the coroner had set off with the dogs without releasing the bodies to the undertaker, so they all just lay in their deathbeds until 11 p.m. on the Monday night. Jeez. Upon examination of the bodies, doctors concluded that the murders had taken place somewhere between midnight and 5 a.m. 2 spent cigarettes were found in the attic area, suggesting that the killer or killers patiently waited in the attic until the Moore family and the Stillinger guests were fast asleep. For the duration of the rest of this podcast, I will stick to the singular word, killer. After a short break, we will look at how the community was turned upside down by the investigation and some of the suspects.
This show is brought to you by courtesy of Neil Packer and the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre. Find them online at www.hauntedresearchcentre.com or at 9 to 11 Regent Street, Hinckley, LE10 1AW. Open Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for haunted rooms guided tours at just £3 per person. Booking is essential at all times and over 16s only, unless accompanied by an adult. The haunted rooms are extremely haunted, and paranormal activity could, and has, taken place at any time. Some areas and particular objects or items can be quite scary and unnerving. The Gift and Craft Shop is open daily from Monday to Saturday, 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m, selling a wide variety of paranormal items, books, magazines, merchandise stock, and cats. Why not pay them a visit to pick up a gift with a difference? Membership is available for £25 to qualify for selective discounts. And why not download the app, available on iOS and Android for only $3.99, to keep you up to date with what's coming up at the centre.
Okay, people, this is where it gets a little bit graphic, so you've been warned. The killers began in the master bedroom, where Josiah and Sarah Moore were sleeping. Josiah received more blows from the axe than any other victim. His face had been cut to such an extent that his eyes were actually missing. The ceiling in this room also had gouge marks from where the murderer had lifted the axe back up to make the fatal blows that murdered him. The killer had used the blade of the axe on Josiah, while using only the blunt end on the rest of the victims. Herman, Mary Catherine, Arthur and Paul were next, and all bludgeoned in the head in the same manner as their parents. After these four